Something is wrong with the way this whole Claressa Shields homewrecker narrative has been sold to the public, and I have been sitting on this for weeks because I wanted to make absolutely sure before I opened my mouth. But after that latest sit-down where the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world looked into a camera and told grown adults that she and Papoose'S have been on the phone all day, every day, for 6 months straight, as if that was some kind of romantic flex and not the most damning self-incrimination a woman in her position has ever put on tape. I cannot hold this any longer. The GWOAT, the same woman who just walked through Frank Han Cruz Dessert earlier this year at Little Caesars in Detroit like it was a light sparring session. The same woman who has 17 wins and 0 losses and is being called the greatest woman of all time in the sport of boxing is out here in interview after interview trying to convince the culture that she did not disrupt a marriage, that there was no happy home to break, that the union between Papoose'S and Remy Ma was already dead by the time she walked into the picture in July of 2024, and I am here to tell you tonight that everything you have been watching about this situation has been framed around the wrong question. The question is not whether Claressa is a homewrecker. The question is why every single timeline she has given publicly contradicts the timeline Papoose'S himself put on record when he went live in December of 2024 to defend himself. And why nobody in this space has stopped to line up her words next to his words next to the receipts Remy Ma dropped. Because when you do that, when you actually put the 3 timelines side by side, the entire narrative collapses. There is a name that appears in the Cam Newton interview and a name that appears in Papoose'S response video and a name that appears in the leaked text messages, and nobody has connected the 3 dots yet. And when we get to the non-negotiable breakdown later in this video, and I promise you we are getting there, you're going to understand why everything Claressa Shields has said in the last 12 months about this relationship was never actually the truth. It was rehearsed. It was strategic. And it was designed to protect a career that is quietly starting to buckle under the weight of it. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Let me set the table for the people who are just tuning in, because there are layers to this thing that even the folks who have been following since December of 2024 do not fully have their arms around. Claressa Shields is arguably the greatest female boxer of all time. That is not a debate anymore. She holds titles across 3 weight classes. She just defended her undisputed heavyweight strap in February of 2026. And she is set to return to 160 to challenge K. Scott for the unified WBC and WBA middleweight titles later this year on DAZN. That is her professional life. Her personal life is a completely different story. In December of 2024, Remy Ma, the rapper known to the world as Remy Ma, went public on her Instagram and accused her husband of 9 years, Papoose'S, of being in an affair with Claressa Shields. She did not just accuse. She dropped receipts. She leaked text messages between Papoose'S and Claressa where Claressa was allegedly demanding to know why he let both his phones die and did not call her, where she was demanding to know why he was not sleeping on the phone with her every night, where she was pressing him about a company party and about a Sprinter van and about all kinds of moving around behavior that made 0 sense for a man who was supposedly a devoted husband still living under the same roof as his wife and their young daughter. That is the surface. Underneath the surface, the stakes are enormous. Papoose'S and Remy Ma had been married since 2016. They had built a love and hip-hop empire together. They had a daughter together who at the time was 6 years old. They had a business, a brand, a partnership, a public image that had been sold to the culture for almost a decade. And in the span of 1 weekend, all of it was on fire. By 2025, the couple had publicly confirmed they were separated after 9 years of marriage. By 2026, we are still watching this thing play out on podcasts and interviews and Instagram lives, and every single time Claressa Shields sits down to explain herself, she makes it worse. What is at stake here is not just gossip. What is at stake is the reputation of the greatest female boxer alive at the exact moment she should be locking in the biggest sponsorship deals of her career. What is at stake is how the culture reads a woman who wants to be a mainstream sports icon, but keeps handing the internet ammunition to disqualify her from that lane. And what is at stake is the truth, because there are 3 versions of this story floating around right now, and only one of them can be real. So let me ask you the question that this entire video is going to answer. If Papoose'S and Remy Ma were already over by 2022, the way Claressa keeps insisting they were, then why did Papoose'S himself go on live in December of 2024 and say the exact opposite? Sit with that. Because the answer is where the entire narrative falls apart. Let me start with what is visible on the tape, because before we get into what people are saying behind the scenes, I want you to see with your own eyes what has already been documented on the public record. The Cam Newton interview. The Cam Newton interview is the single most damaging piece of footage Claressa Shields has ever participated in, and the tragedy of it is that she did not know it while she was sitting in the chair. Cam Newton, credit where it is due, did the interview so smooth she never saw the setup coming. He was conversational. He complimented her. He talked about her fights. He talked about her titles. And then when her guard was completely down, he slid in the one question that unraveled everything. He asked her, was he married? And Claressa, instead of shutting the question down or redirecting or giving the answer any competent public relations team would have prepared her to give, sat there and answered like she was sitting in a middle school cafeteria explaining a crush. She said her non-negotiable in the relationship was that she and Papoose'S stayed on the phone all day, every day, and fell asleep on the phone every night, and that they did that for 6 months straight before the situation with Remy blew up publicly. 6 months. She put that number on the record herself. That is piece of evidence number 1, and I want you to hold on to it because it is going to detonate in a second. Piece of evidence number 2 is the Cam Newton follow-up, when he asked her directly about the homewrecker narrative and she pivoted to talking about her movie. She literally answered a question about breaking up a happy home by referencing a Christmas Day theatrical release. That is not the response of somebody who has a clean conscience about the timeline. That is the response of somebody who has been coached to change the subject and did it so clumsily that the internet caught it in real time. Piece of evidence number 3 is the text messages Remy Ma leaked in December of 2024. In those messages, allegedly, Claressa is going back and forth with Papoose'S about him falling asleep in a Sprinter van, about him letting both of his phones die, about him not calling her, and there is one specific line where she says to him, "You are the one that is married. Take accountability. You are the one that is married." She wrote those words. She acknowledged in writing that he was a married man. That is not my analysis. That is the receipt. Piece of evidence number 4 is the public-facing timeline of Papoose'S and Remy as a couple. There is documented footage of Papoose'S and Remy attending the Errol Spence vs. Terrence Crawford fight together in the summer of 2023, hugged up, looking every bit like a functioning married couple. And there are Instagram posts from Papoose'S in 2023 referring to Remy publicly as his beautiful wife when she appeared on the Drew Barrymore show. That is 2023. That is well after the 2022 date Claressa keeps citing as the year the marriage was allegedly already dead. So already, before we even get into what the insiders are saying, the visible tape does not support her story. She said 6 months of exclusive phone-attached romance leading up to the December 2024 exposure. Count 6 months backwards from December 2024. That puts the start of the relationship somewhere around June or July of 2024. But she also told Cam Newton she met him on July 6th of 2024. So which is it? Was the phone-attached daily communication non-negotiable happening from day 1 of meeting him? Because that is what the math says. And if that is what the math says, then Papoose'S was on the phone all day, every day, with another woman while he was still living under the same roof as his wife and their young daughter. That is not a dead marriage. That is a betrayal in progress. And oh, do I have more? Because everything I just laid out is only what is visible on the surface. That is only the tape you can pull up on YouTube and Instagram right now. What is coming next is the stuff that has been discussed behind the scenes, in industry rooms, on podcasts nobody watches, in comment sections that get scrubbed within hours. The people in this space who actually know what happened, they have been talking, and the picture they paint is not the picture Claressa Shields has been selling. So if you thought the Cam Newton interview was bad, buckle in, because the cultural response to this thing has been an avalanche, and Claressa has been so busy fighting off the wave that she has not noticed the wave behind the wave. The stans are really not going to like this next part. And I want you to pay special attention to what Papoose'S himself said in his own words on his own live stream, because when I lay his words next to her words, one of these two people is fabricating, and it is not going to be hard to figure out which one. Let me walk you through what the culture has been saying, because this thing has moved so far past being a private matter that even people who normally stay out of celebrity relationship drama have jumped in. The first piece of cultural evidence is the reaction from Papoose'S own family and Remy's own family. Brie, Claressa's own sister, allegedly went live on social media and pointed out that Claressa herself has dated married men before. That is not a stranger saying it. That is her own bloodline. When your own sister goes on the internet and puts that on the record, the narrative that you would never knowingly pursue a married man collapses on impact. That is piece of cultural evidence number 1. Piece of cultural evidence number 2 is Fat Joe. Fat Joe, on the record, stated that the day before Remy Ma went public with the exposure in December of 2024, Papoose'S and Remy were out to dinner together. Out to dinner. As a couple. 24 hours before the entire internet found out about the affair. That is not the behavior of a marriage that has been dead since 2022. That is the behavior of a marriage that was still functioning, still communicating, still eating meals together, right up until the moment Remy decided she had enough evidence to blow the whole thing up. Piece of cultural evidence number 3 is the response from the broader boxing and hip-hop community, and this is where it gets particularly bad for Claressa. Her most recent interviews are pulling numbers so low that even her own team has to be alarmed. Interviews with major platforms, less than 200 views on some of them. Meanwhile, the YouTubers she has publicly labeled as her ops, the commentators she has tried to silence, the people she calls out by name on her Instagram lives, they are the ones getting massive numbers by discussing her behavior. That is not a coincidence. That is the market telling you what it actually wants to consume when your name comes up. It does not want to hear about your fight. It wants to hear about the timeline. And that is a devastating position to be in as an athlete whose entire brand is supposed to be built on athletic dominance. Piece of cultural evidence number 4 is the Papoose'S live stream from December of 2024, which I want to spend some real time on because this is where the whole story fractures. In that live stream, Papoose'S sat down and gave his side of the events, and in giving his side, he directly contradicted every single thing Claressa Shields has since claimed publicly. Papoose'S said Remy cheated on him with a battle rapper. Papoose'S said he and Remy went to therapy after the cheating. Papoose'S said the therapist asked them both, "Do you want a divorce or do you want to work it out?" And they both said, "We want to work it out." Papoose'S said Remy allegedly kept violating the terms of the therapy agreement. Papoose'S said he stayed in the house for the sake of his daughter. Papoose'S said, and this is a direct quote from his own mouth, that he lived by his wedding vows, richer for poorer, sickness, and health. Now stop. Stop and think about what he just said. He said in December of 2024, publicly, on his own live stream, that he was still committed to working it out with Remy through therapy. He said this while he was already in a relationship with Claressa Shields. He said this while, according to Claressa's own testimony to Cam Newton, they had already been together for 6 months. So how do you reconcile that? How do you look at a man who says on tape that he was still in couples therapy trying to save his marriage and simultaneously believe the woman who says she was told the marriage had been dead since 2022? You cannot. Those two things cannot both be true. And now I want to acknowledge something before I keep going, because I want to be fair. Some of you are going to say, well, maybe Papoose'S was lying in his live stream to save face. Maybe he was performing loyalty to Remy in public while he was actually cheating in private. That is a valid counterargument and I hear it. But here is why it does not save Claressa. Even if Papoose'S was lying in December of 2024, that means he was lying to protect his marriage image, which means the marriage image still mattered to him at that point, which means the marriage was not the corpse Claressa is telling the culture it was. Either way, her story does not survive. Either the marriage was still active or the marriage was still important enough to lie about. Either one buries the homewrecker defense. Now I want to shift completely, because up to this point we have been talking about relationships and receipts and text messages and interviews, and the surface level version of this story is that it is a love triangle gone wrong. That is not what this is. Let me pull the camera back and show you what this actually is, because there are 3 systemic layers running underneath this entire situation that nobody is discussing, and once you see them, you cannot unsee them. The first systemic layer is the media strategy. Claressa Shields is being managed. That is not speculation. That is observable behavior. Every interview she does, every podcast she sits on, every social media post she makes, follows a specific pattern of denial, redirection, and image control. She only goes on platforms where she knows the questions will be soft. She avoids the platforms and the creators who will actually press her on the timeline. She has publicly labeled multiple YouTubers as ops specifically because those YouTubers will not ask her the questions on the softball circuit. That is a media strategy. And that strategy is telling you something important, which is that the people around her understand that if she is ever asked hard, real, specific questions in a setting she cannot control, the entire narrative falls apart. That is systemic layer 1. The people managing her know the story does not hold up. That is why she is only allowed to tell it in rooms where nobody will check her. The second systemic layer is the sponsorship and brand economics. Female boxing is at an inflection point. DAZN has been pouring resources into it. Netflix has been pouring resources into it. There are sponsorship dollars available right now for female boxers that did not exist 5 years ago, and the woman who is best positioned to capture those dollars is supposed to be Claressa Shields. Undisputed across 3 divisions. The pound-for-pound conversation starts with her. She should be the face of the sport. But sponsors do not want messy. Sponsors do not want ongoing homewrecker allegations. Sponsors do not want text message receipts. Sponsors do not want a woman whose most watched clips online are her yelling at other women or defending her relationship with a man whose divorce is not yet finalized. Every single week this drama continues. Claressa Shields is losing money. Not in appearance fees. Not in ticket sales. In long-term brand equity. That is systemic layer 2. The chaos in her personal life is actively costing her the commercial ceiling of her professional career, and either she does not understand that or she does not care. Both possibilities are alarming for a woman who has built her entire adult life around being the best. The third systemic layer, and this is the one I want you to sit with the longest, is the way this entire narrative reveals how women in hip-hop and combat sports get positioned by the culture. Remy Ma got the initial public heat when this thing broke in December of 2024. The culture, for a moment, sided with Papoose'S. He is the calm one, he is the reasonable one, she is the emotional one, she is the bitter one. That was the framing. Fast forward to 2026, and the framing has completely flipped. Now Papoose'S looks like a man who is still on live streams calling another man a lame and a cornball a full year after his wife allegedly moved on. Now Papoose'S looks like a man who filed for divorce electronically in December of 2024, conveniently right after the public exposure, when according to his own claims of infidelity, he should have filed years earlier. Now Papoose'S looks like a man whose story has more holes than substance. And Claressa, who signed up for all of this, is being dragged along with him. That is systemic layer 3. She hitched her career to a man whose own timeline does not survive scrutiny, and now every time his story cracks, her story cracks with it. That is not a relationship. That is a codependent liability. And the boxing world is watching. The hip-hop world is watching. And the sponsorship world is quietly making decisions about who they can and cannot associate with going forward. Every one of these 3 systemic layers points in the same direction. The homewrecker narrative is not a gossip story. It is a business story. And Claressa Shields is losing that business story in real time whether she realizes it or not. Here is the truth that this entire video has been building toward, and I want to say it plainly because it deserves to be said plainly. Claressa Shields did not just walk into a marriage that was already dead. According to Papoose'S own words, on his own live stream, in his own voice, that marriage was in couples therapy in an active attempt to be saved. That is not my interpretation. That is his interpretation of his own marriage as of December 2024, delivered directly into a camera by him. And Claressa Shields, according to her own words to Cam Newton, had been in a phone-attached, all day every day, exclusive romantic relationship with that same man for 6 months by that point. Line up the dates. 6 months before December 2024 is roughly June or July of 2024. She said she met him July 6th of 2024. Papoose'S was in therapy allegedly trying to save his marriage and simultaneously on the phone all day, every day, with another woman as a non-negotiable. Both of those things cannot be true at the same time unless the therapy was a lie or the exclusivity was a lie. And either way, somebody got played. Either Remy got played by a husband who was pretending to work it out while carrying on a full romance behind her back, or Claressa got played by a man who was performing loyalty to his wife while dangling a fake exclusive with her on the side. Or, and this is the darkest reading, both women got played by a man who was running 2 committed relationships simultaneously and lying to both of them about the state of the other one. That is the truth bomb. This has never been a story about a boxer stealing a rapper's husband. This has been a story about a man who was allegedly running a parallel relationship for months while his wife was still in the house, still going to therapy with him, still attending events with him, still eating dinner with him 24 hours before the exposure, and neither woman fully understood what was happening because he was telling both of them exactly what they wanted to hear. And the reason this reveal matters, the reason this is the moment that changes how you read this entire story, is because it takes Claressa Shields off the pedestal of the confident champion who chose her partner and reduces her to what she has actually been the entire time, which is one of 2 women who were being managed by the same man in overlapping timelines. That is not a flex. That is not a win. That is not the cheat code to life she called it on Instagram. That is being on the losing end of a situation you did not fully see because you were too busy defending it to look at it clearly. And the reason she keeps snapping at interviewers, the reason she keeps going after commentators, the reason she keeps posting bikini pictures and calling out other women, the reason she cannot stop talking about this even when talking about it is the worst thing she can do for her career, is because somewhere underneath all the noise, she knows. She knows the math does not add up. She knows her sister said what she said. She knows Fat Joe said what he said. She knows Papoose contradicted her on his own live stream. And she is trying to outrun the truth by talking louder than it. But the truth does not lose foot races. The truth just waits. Here is where I land, and I want to be careful with this section because I want to be honest, not cruel. The person who is still winning at the end of all of this, if you take a hard look, is Claressa Shields the boxer. Not Claressa Shields the girlfriend. Not Claressa Shields the Instagram personality. Not Claressa Shields the podcast guest. Claressa Shields the boxer is still the greatest female fighter alive. She is still 17-0. She still walked through Frankhon Cruz Dezern in February of 2026 like a professional. She is still slated to go back down to 160 and challenge K. Scott for the unified middleweight titles on DAZN. Inside the ring, the discipline, the technique, the work ethic, all of it is still there. That is the version of Claressa Shields that made her the GWOAT in the first place, and that version is still winning. And the reason I am pointing that out is because I want the culture to remember what actually made her great. It was not the boyfriend. It was not the interviews. It was not the drama. It was the 16-hour training days. It was the amateur career that stacked more medals than any American female boxer in history. It was the 2 Olympic gold medals. It was the willingness to move up in weight to challenge anyone who would fight her. That is who Claressa Shields was before this entire chapter started, and that is who she still is when she puts the gloves on. The tragedy of this whole situation is that a woman who built her career on discipline is currently letting a relationship overshadow the very thing that made her worth talking about in the first place. One person makes music that nobody is playing anymore. The other person makes history in the ring and then hands the internet a homewrecker headline in the parking lot. The contrast is brutal. And here is the good news, and I am going to end on this, because I actually want the best for her long term. Claressa Shields is one clean training camp and one dominant title fight away from resetting this entire conversation. If she goes back to 160, walks through K. Scott, refuses to do any more soft interviews for 6 months, focuses entirely on the sport, and lets the drama die on the vine, the culture will move on. The culture always moves on when the athlete gives it something bigger to look at. That is how these things get healed. Not by more interviews. Not by more Instagram posts. By more work. The right person in the right position is still the fighter. The fighter is the version of her that wins. The girlfriend is the version of her that loses. And the sooner she picks a lane, the sooner this whole thing settles down. But make no mistake, this is only the start. There are 2 things I am tracking closely as this story continues to unfold, and I want you to track them with me. The first is the divorce filing itself. Papoose electronically filed for divorce in December of 2024, but the couple is still legally married as of this recording. Every week that goes by without a finalized divorce is another week that Claressa Shields is technically dating a legally married man, and every interview she gives during that window is another opportunity for the timeline to be picked apart. When that divorce finally finalizes, whether it is a quiet mediation or a courtroom fight, the details that come out during that process are going to be explosive. Watch for it. The second thing I am tracking is the K. Scott fight. That fight is going to be a stress test for Claressa's brand. If she wins dominantly and behaves professionally in the lead-up, the culture will start to give her some grace. If she uses Fight Week to trade shots on Instagram with commentators and post more relationship content, the drama cycle will absorb the fight and drown it. Either way, we are going to be watching. Because the story does not end when the interview ends. The story ends when the receipts stop coming, and right now, the receipts are still coming. So if you made it to this point in the video, you're amazing, and if you want to make sure you do not miss the next chapter, you already know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, turn the notifications on, because when the divorce papers drop, when the K. Scott fight arrives, when the next receipt hits the timeline, this is where you are going to hear it broken down first. And the next video I am dropping this week, you do not want to miss, because I am going deep on the Papoose money situation. Specifically how a man who claimed on live stream that he paid every bill in the household ended up filing for divorce electronically the same week his wife exposed him. and why the timing of that filing tells you everything about who is really running the finances in that marriage. There is a paper trail. I found it. And when I lay it out next episode, a lot of the assumptions you have been carrying about who is the provider in that house are going to flip. See you there.